Just acknowledging that, like, the world we live in is not abstract. It's anchored in place. It's born in place. We belong to places. Places belong to us, in a sense. Like, we are, even if we live in a very kind of disembodied, cosmopolitan, world, which some of us do, there is still place. There's a multiplicity of places that are involved in our existence. And there is a deep need for belonging, right? For like refinding our belonging as human beings in the web of life, in the places where we're at, because we do belong. Like, we're part of this planet, just like lichens and whales and sea stars and rain. Like, we're here, we're part of this creation, so we do belong. But we belong in places. And how do we honor place? How do we honor the histories and legacies of place? How can we heal the histories and legacies of place?
Welcome to the Passing Through podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments. I speak with thinkers, authors, artists, teachers, and everyday humans who have touched the edge of the ordinary and found something to bring back. Hello, hello, hello. It's me again, and I'm still in Poland at the previous place I was where I recorded last week's intro. Except this time, I am inside of Wilma, our beloved Volkswagen Transporter, which is not only our valiant steed, but our home as we tour the European continent and volunteer on regenerative farms and permaculture sites and eco-villages to get our hands back in the soil and reconnect with the land. And there are many things that I would like to talk about in this intro. I'd like to share the things I've been dreaming, metaphorically and literally, the things I've been doing, the conversations I've had with chickens, and the pieces of wood that I've been feeding to the stove, the secrets whispered to me by the ancient grains that I've been grinding into flour. All of these fascinating things will have to wait because I have something more fascinating in store for you today. And that is this episode's conversation with Anna Kovasna. And I'm really excited to get into this conversation, so I'm going to try to be brief so we can just get there already. I feel like I've already spoken too much, but I need to introduce her. I first met Anna earlier this year at the Global Ecovillage Network gathering in Hungary, and my partner Asha and I attended her workshop without knowing anything about her. And as soon as Anna started speaking, I had this sense of, yes, like, this is my people. She is my people. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you just really resonate with something that someone is saying, and it sounds like they reached inside your heart and managed to just pluck the strings and get you vibrating, and they just put words to things that are humming deep in your soul. And this was my experience with Anna. And after that workshop, I then found out that she was also going to be a keynote speaker at this event. And her talk there also set off a flurry of fireworks and just had me humming. So I was really excited to steal a little bit of her time there, and I invited her to this podcast. And so here we are now. That's how I came to know Anna, but I want to tell you a bit about her so you can come to know Anna. She's a systems thinker. She's a creative convener, a passionate weaver of local resilience and kinship with all life. Anna works with communities worldwide to nurture regenerative practice and systems change, grounded in animist and relational worldviews. So you can begin to see why I loved what she was saying so much. She's co-founder of Kincentric Leadership, which nurtures ways of leading and living rooted in kinship with a living, intelligent earth. And if that wasn't enough, with deep roots in the eco-village movement, she also serves as strategic lead for community resilience at the Global Ecovillage Network, where she explores community-led ways of navigating the polycrisis. She is co-chair of Transition Network International, a trustee of Gaia Education, and co-founder of the Living Systems Alliance, a cross-movement initiative advancing place-based, more-than-human governance and living systems design. And after decades of eco-village living, Anna now lives with her more-than-human kin on a small permaculture homestead in the Pyrenees. So I hope your excitement and anticipation is building, because these are all themes that are very at home on this podcast. These are things that are always bristling in my heart, and it was a joy to be able to speak with Anna about some of this stuff. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. There's so much richness to it, and I'm eager to get into it. We move all over the place. We talk about relationality and kincentrism, which, if you haven't heard that term before, is basically the understanding that all of the beings around us, the plants and animals and fungi and rocks and rivers, are our relatives to whom we are inextricably linked. We talk about how to be good kin to our brothers and sisters on this planet. We talk about indigenous lifeways, Anna's experience in the Peruvian Amazon with the Matses people, reciprocity, how to show good etiquette to human and non-human persons, how animist or kincentric worldviews can shift the way we organize our communities. We talk about principles such as sacredness and animacy and equity and justice, not just for humans, but for non-humans as well. We talk about belonging and place, imagination, and so much more. This was absolutely one of my favorite conversations of the year. So if you're a longtime listener of this show, I guess even if you're a brand new listener of this show, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation too. So if you're interested in connecting with Anna, you can find her on our website at kincentricleadership.org, or you can connect with her on LinkedIn. And I'll have the links to her website and to her LinkedIn in the show notes, so you could go there and find those if you want to find Anna. So as always, be good to one another, to all of your extended family on this planet. I'll be back next week, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Okay, so Anna Kovasna, welcome to the Passing Through podcast. It is an honor to sit down with you.
Thank you so much, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really curious where our conversation will take us.
Me too. When we first met back at the Global Ecovillage Network gathering, I was really excited to speak to you, to attend one of your workshops, to just hear your voice and your ideas. And I felt at that time that you'd be a really natural fit on this podcast, because you stand at the intersection of so many things that I'm passionate about, that I think are important right now, because we live in a story that says that we're alone, that the world around us is just mute matter and it's there for the taking. And this story has kind of shaped everything: our economies, our religions, our sciences, even our sense of self. And you offer a different and compelling story. So maybe to start us off, we can root down a bit into this new language of kincentrism and how it differs from these common Western narratives about the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So kincentrism or kincentric ecology, it's a concept from indigenous scholars from the beginning. So it comes from Denis Martinez and Enrique Salmon. And they use it to denote like a relational worldview that's common amongst indigenous peoples. So I have it from them, and I've adopted it from them. And when I explain it or speak about it with people, I usually contrast it, with other worldviews. Like you can have an anthropocentric worldview, right, where the human being is at the center of everything, of our systems, of our understanding of evolution, of intelligence, of everything. Like everything is pointing to the human, and very often to a very particular white colonial masculine body, embodied human. So with gradations in there. Then we have things like ecocentric worldviews, right? Which takes a step away from that and says like, no, like the ecology, nature is at the center of what's there. And there is incredible amounts of beautiful work being done in ecocentric worldviews, like deep ecology, and it's magnificent. But it's still, for me, doesn't fully bring home the relational nature of our existence.
Hmm.
Because it's not there inherently, but you can still be like, oh, that's the ecology, and this is me. Or that's that thing, nature, and this is us humans, we're not part of it. And what I really like about the idea of kincentric worldviews is, first of all, it places relationships at the center, because being kin is being in relationship. So it points directly to like, we are interdependent, we are family, we exist through and because of each other. But not only that, it also gives an ethical compass for how those relationships can be structured, organized, approach, which is through an ethic of kinship, right? So how are we good kin? We can first acknowledge that we live in full interbeing, interdependence, whichever word you prefer, with everything that exists at a very like fundamental level. We are not. I love thinking about this. That like I don't even exist as a unit, as a thing. Like I only exist as a nexus of flows and
Hmm.
processes within me. Like I am completely in flux all the time. And all those flows connect me to everything else that's existing. And some of those flows are really long, like all the way back to the Big Bang, or the creation of like metals and stars that are now part of my blood so that I can metabolize oxygen. So some of them are very long. Some of them are just like the water from the spring in the mountains here where I live that I drink every day, that becomes part of me, right? So in very, very tangible ways, we are flows. Our ideas are in flow. Like it's just that. But then to come at that and be like, okay, I live in this incredible world where everything is flowing and nothing is actually separate, like very, very tangibly. How do I show up
Hmm.
coherently, like in that world? And that's for me where the idea of kincentric ecology, or kincentrism. I don't love saying ism because I don't think it's an ism, but the language is a little bit limiting there. But it helps me orient of like, okay, wow, I am receiving all of this. I'm also, of course, like a point of departure for these flows, right? So what's coming out of me? Like how are those flows? And it helps me situate myself and my work, and I think also the communities and systems that I work with, within that bigger sense of flow, and also within the sense of responsibility that comes with, okay, how do I want to show up as a good family member in that big web?
Thank you. That gives me some good context. And to just paraphrase it briefly for listeners, it sounds like it closely aligns with animist cosmology, where everything is connected, everything is intelligent and has agency, and for lack of a better word, is alive. And feeling into where we sit in that nexus, as you described it, is important, because often in the dominant narratives, we are the nexus, we are the pinnacle of evolution, right? I think, though, that when some people hear animism or kincentricity, they might dismiss it as fanciful, as though it's just a bunch of hippies talking to trees. But what I love about the description you just gave and your work in general is the way that you integrate science, academic rigor, and indigenous wisdom into the frame, so that we could then use concentrism as a path towards deep systemic change. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I get the sense that for you, it is like a profound paradigm shift to embrace this different story.
Yeah, let's see where to start, because it's true. I didn't really speak about, that the kind of animist angle. It's there a little hidden, because if something is kin, it's also a person, right? That I'm relating to somebody, not to an object. And for me, that's definitely true. It's also true, like in my work, I'm a bit like agnostic about where your knowledge comes from, or like the entry point into it. And I like that because I weave those things in myself. Like I have profound experiences of communication, connection, union with non-human beings, landscapes, and entities. I am also a social scientist, not a natural scientist, but I really appreciate the precision of the knowledge that can come. And like in our world that we live in, where many of us don't have very intimate knowledge and relationship with the more than human world, it can be such a doorway into wonder and into like, wow, that's how it works, like, so I think it's
Mm,
there. And then, as you said, also indigenous wisdom as well as life ways, because I think what all of those kind of points towards to me, but maybe particularly the indigenous life ways, is that these worldviews and orientations, they are not just like little ideas about how, oh, this tree has a soul, or, has a spirit that I can talk to. But it's a fundamental like organizing parameter for society. So it's
mm,
not just like a spiritual belief or a religion or something like that. It's not. It's just that it's like at the core, just a fundamentally different way of approaching the world that then ripples out into how our economy is organized, how our social relationships look, how we see ourselves and our identities, like all of that. And I think we can learn a lot from indigenous peoples in that, because they have access to, because they have kept living and live in systems where that is more intact, that link. Whereas for those of us who, like myself, come from kind of global north industrialized post-capitalist these days, but like societies, it can feel abstract because our systems don't gel. Like it's one thing to have a belief, in your heart and mind, but when that's never reflected in the outside world, it's never reflected in how I live, how the institutions I interact with every day channel my energy and reflect me back. It's difficult to anchor it, and that's when it can become more like hippies hugging trees. That's very derogatory, but it can become like a sort of like internal orientation, whereas actually it's a very, very radical proposition for reorienting everything about society. So I feel like there was more in your question than what I spoke to, but feel free to remind me.
yeah, no, I think you are building into a deeper answer, which is great. I loved everything that you just said, and I want to dig deeper into that because I wonder what that looks like. Like, if we do understand it as something much more visceral than a belief, then what do governance, economies, educational systems, or even, spirituality in that sense, what do those things become in a kincentric civilization? Because our civilization right now is not kincentric. There was an experience I had in your workshop, and I still talk about it to people because it was that impactful. And it was a moment where you just asked a simple thing. You asked us to imagine what a world would look like if it were fully realized. And the word that I was standing in front of was animacy and intelligence. And when I imagined that world, I saw these things as deeply transformative. The governance systems seemed different. The economy seemed like it changed everything when I used my imagination to invoke that future. When you imagine a future where, let's say, like we snapped our fingers and we were able to just create this world where the central narrative was kincentrism, like, how would that shift all of these harmful structures that we see today?
I'm gonna get there, but I remember what I didn't speak to, and which was
Okay.
which was the essence what you're bringing of animacy, right? Animacy and intelligence. So I think I want to touch in on that, and then because you mentioned the workshop, I think it would be helpful to just mention some of the core principles that I'm working with
Okay.
within Kincentric Leadership, and because they point towards that bigger structural change. So yeah, first of all, I didn't mention it, but all of these sources of knowing, indigenous wisdom and life ways, the intuitive practice, science, all point towards, and common sense point towards, like, human beings are not the only intelligent animate being in this existence, right? Actually, everything has an embodied intelligence of its own, whether that's a cycle in a system or what we perceive to be an entity or an animal or a plant, right? And in indigenous cosmologies, and like the ones I know the best, they are from the Amazon, because that's where I have spent the most time. I mean, they have this revolutionary, to me, idea. Like, it really, really tickled me when I found out. that everything has a soul, and our soul is the same, like our spirit is the same. It
Mm.
perceives itself the same way. It interacts and relates like as we perceive ourselves as human beings. What's different is our embodiment. And our embodiment is created by how we are behaving in the world, like what we are eating, who we are eating together with, who we nurture and who nurtures us, like determines our physical shape and determines like our species. It determines if I'm a jaguar, tapir, a human being, or a rock, you know?
Mm.
But internally, the experience of all those beings is exactly the same. And if you don't perform humanity, you will transform. Like you will become a spirit or a jaguar or something else, and you will stop existing, like in this human body. And I just love that because it turns our sense completely upside down, right? We tend to believe we have a fixed body, but like maybe the soul is transient or it's different and different. But we tend to like locate similarity in the material in the worldview that I come from, not in the soul. So I love that. But I think if you're looking, at indigenous worldviews, but as well as science, there's incredible research around the communication of bats and whales who have like huge lexicon of words. They have personal names. They sing songs to their children. They communicate across oceans. You have plants that react with intention and agency to the world around them. And everybody is kind of constructing the world. Like we're not just like automatons moving around. We are all like creating it together through our embodied intelligence, through doing our piece in there. And that for me is also a big shift because it means that the people I am relating to in the interdependent web of relationships, it's not things, right? They're all people. And I
Mm.
think that's another like really fundamental shift of, can I stop seeing objects around me? Can I start to relate to everything as if it was a person? Because again, ethically, it helps me orient, right? You can treat an object in a certain way that you would ideally, I mean, you can be a psychopath, but like you would not treat the person in that way. So I think it's like factually true that there are people with intelligence and agency, emotional lives, like all of that. Everybody who has lived with an animal knows that the animal is intelligent, has personality, has desires, feels pain and joy and all of that. Anyways, we would just relate differently. So that's kind of at the core of it. So I think with like that, with the idea of animism, with the idea of kinship as an ethical compass, you arrive in something I like calling it etiquette. Some people hate it,
Mm.
but I really enjoy it. I have it from Graham Harvey, who's a professor of religious studies, and he simply says like religion is a way of it's like etiquette for being with non-human beings. It's like
Mm.
it gives you the rules for how to interact with non-human beings, and I love that because it's like what's good etiquette? Like how do I show up as a polite entity within this world of incredibly diverse people, that each require their particular etiquette. You don't treat your grandmother in the same way that you treat your little sister, or you don't treat a stranger the way you treat a friend, but there is etiquette, like for kind
Mm.
of friendly kinship interactions. And I think some of the etiquette, if you look at the indigenous and like land-based society, are things like reciprocity, right?
Yes.
We get so many gifts. I exist only because all of these other beings exist and give their gifts to me in that flow that I spoke about. So what am I giving back? How am I returning the gifts? How am I passing things on? And it doesn't have to be like tit for tat, you gave me this, I give you that. It's more like, how am I in the web of the flows? Am I giving back? You have things like reverence. Many, many traditional land-based cultures, they have a sense of reverence for the living world. And it helps us. It helps us to show up as good people within that world, to treat it with reverence, to say, like, it's sacred and I'm sacred. And this web that I am part of is sacred because this is life. Like, this is what
Mm.
gives life. This is what gives birth to all of this unbelievable beauty and abundance that's around us, that nurtures all of us, that we are creating together. There's that. And with that comes things like gratitude, also. So, how do I give thanks? How do I give back? And I think even if you look at something like, to move towards your question around like bigger systems change and like what would that world be? Even if you take just one of those things like reciprocity, right? And you can look at it from, how am I giving back in terms of my love and my attention? Maybe I tend my garden more lovingly, like I speak to my plants. Like it can be very like in my small world.
Mm.
Maybe I do a ritual of thanks. It was just Samhain. I just celebrated Samhain last weekend together with some dear friends. And we, of course, thanked our ancestors. I had dinner with my ancestors in their honor, offered them food and wine and sat with them just to express my thanks and to invite their teachings. So there are actions like that. But we also live in a system, an economic system, a materials flow system that is fundamentally not reciprocal.
Yes.
So like it's a very like tangible, like in this world example, but like I flushed the toilet and like what should be nutrients for the soil, it's like put into fresh water, which is
Yes.
like bad etiquette, taken away to some faraway place where it's treated with chemicals and this and that and becomes something else. And instead of me being in that short cycle of reciprocity with the land that feeds me, it's broken, right? And that's a small example, but you can look at it like with like global economy, like how large our material flows are, how much of the horrible extraction of violence that our economy rests on is possible because the distances in time and geography are really, really big. So
Mm.
it lets us be blind to what's going on, and it gives us like a free pass for not living in reciprocity. So I think a very tangible way is like, how do I make sure that the systems that I live through, and can be a very, very big change, like do not enable that. Like what would it look like if, at least in the material flows that keep me and my loved ones alive, were not contributing to that, but actually were systems of reciprocity. So, and I mean that could be anything from I am boycotting industrial food systems, which bring incredible suffering and destruction to so many of our kin. It can be supporting local artisans. It can be like there's a lot, but just like to close that loop, to create more local, shorter loop systems where we understand the consequences of our actions, so that we have a chance to also behave ethically. But it can, of course, also be like maybe buying fair trade bananas instead of like other ones. So that's one way, right? Like looking at our material flows and how we can show up in both like inner sort of spiritual, emotional reciprocity, but actually in material reciprocity. I think that's really important. And I wanted to mention the core principles of Kincentric Leadership, which is this organization that I co-founded together with my colleague Justine Huxley. And we had the honor of sitting for 2 years together with ourselves, a bunch of our teachers and dear friends, and a cohort of 80 people from around the world, to think about what does this mean? Like, how
Mm.
can we implement, this worldview of a kincentric approach into our very diverse organizations, lives, communities, and what would that look like? What does that bigger dream look like? And as part of kind of synthesizing our learnings from that, we landed on 8 core principles, and they helped me orient a lot, actually, in yeah, how I see it. And it was important for us to have that whole span, like from our inner orientation to our cultural practices to our very systemic and other, I guess, economic systems, like our food systems, things like that. So we started with sacredness. That's our first principle, and we sometimes say that like our first 3 principles, they describe the world as it is, as we think it is. And the first is that the world is sacred. Everything that exists is sacred. Also human beings, right? But it is sacredness. The second one is animus in intelligence. So everything is animate and intelligent. It can move and act with purpose, with emotion, like all of those things we talked about. We then have interdependence. So what I also spoke about, like the world is interdependent. Nothing exists in isolation. So those are kind of our 3. Okay, if we take these as true, everything is sacred, everything is animate, everything is interdependent. What happens then? Like, what do we need to? How do we need to show up? And that led us to the 4th principle we have, which is kinship, which is that ethical orientation I'm speaking about. We then follow that with justice and equity, because there is no true kinship in a deeply unjust, extractive, and system based on dominance and violence. That is not kinship. So how do we make sure that our economy is just, our transition is just, our future society is just? How do we make sure that with justice we also include all of the non-human people, all of the
Mm.
human people, of course, yeah, no bypassing the horrible atrocities that are happening there. But why draw the line of justice at the end of the human, when we have all of these other beings with whom we are creating the world? And then we have co-creation, diversity and co-creation. Because if you live in an interdependent world where everybody is a person, you are in fact always co-creating. There is
Mhm.
no other type of creation. It's only co-creation. So how do I show up to be a good co-creator? How do we leverage the collective intelligence of everybody, which is what nature does. Like nature is this unbelievable expression of collective intelligence where everyone is kind of doing their thing, and what comes out of it is this magnificence that's so much bigger than any one of us, and everyone's kind of working for the good of the whole, just by being them, like just by doing their thing. So I think this is such an interesting provocation for humans, like what would it be like if I just did my Anna things, and the consequence of that was more health and vibrancy for everybody around me. What would it look like if my community was like that? Which is another line of my work, like working with communities as keystone species, as like what would communities be
Mm.
if they upheld like webs of well-being and health and thriving for everybody around. Then we have belonging in place. That's another back to the principles, which is just acknowledging that like the world we live in is not abstract. It's anchored in place. It's born in place. We belong to places. Places belong to us in a sense. Like we are, even if we live in a very kind of disembodied, cosmopolitan, world, which some of us do, there is still place. There's a multiplicity of places that are involved in our existence. And there is a deep need for belonging, right? For like
Yes.
refinding our belonging as human beings in the web of life, in the places where we're at, because we do belong. Like we're part of this planet, just like lichens and whales and sea stars and rain. Like we're here, we're part of this creation, so we do belong. But we belong in places. And how do we honor place? How do we honor the histories and legacies of place? How can we heal the histories and legacies of place? And then our final principle is unraveling, which is more a statement of the time we're in. We were speaking a few days ago, Justine and I, she said, actually the principle is probably cyclical, like cyclicity or something like that. But we are in a moment of unraveling, right? We are in a
Mhm.
moment of mass extinction. We are in a moment of, climate crisis. We are in a moment where the systems that sustain human life have sustained them at the cost of other people's lives. They are also crumbling, which is a good thing because they have to crumble. But the fact that they're doing it also creates a potential for a lot of harm and suffering, right? So it's a complicated, issue. But we live in these times, and they ask something specific of us. They ask that we show up knowing how to grieve. They ask that we show up with an understanding of resilience and what that looks like. And they ask that we show up with incredible solidarity, across boundaries, species, peoples, times. And they ask that we show up with imagination because we need to imagine the new in the cracks of the old, right? That's
Yes.
there. Or take with us the ancient parts and the current parts of like the old that we want to keep into the future. But that all takes incredible imagination. So that was very long, but I, I feel like when you speak, what the world would be like in this, I think very tangibly, when I think a lot about economic systems and food systems, they are two of my favorite things to think about. So, for an example, I really play with the idea of, and this is quite personal, I guess, personal in my own inquiry, but I think about freedom a lot, freedom and liberty
Mm.
and autonomy and what that means. And it's a long history where that has been important to me, but it's an important compass for me. And I've been very inspired by, again, like indigenous takes on what autonomy means. Because what does it mean to be autonomous in an interdependent world where you're actually
Yes.
not autonomous, right? And I've been very inspired by David Graeber here. And I'm an anthropologist. He's also an anthropologist. And he points out that autonomy is like you have to be allowed to opt in, but you also have to be allowed to opt out. Yeah. And I thought about this in terms of how I would redesign a food system, for example. Like, what if we designed a food system where the beings that we eat they can opt in and they can opt out. And what does that mean? It
Mm.
means, like, how can I tend the ecosystem around me so well that it becomes such an abundant home that the beings that I feed on, because that's the reality of, having a body on this planet that we do eat each other. So how can the beings that I feed on want to be here? Like, they want to live with me. They want to be here. So how can we as humans, tend places and habitats where other beings want to be so much that our food is like right here, right? That's one of them. Very radical when it comes to like farm animals and animal agriculture and that. And the other is like, what does opt out look like? And I've thought about this a lot. Like, in order to be able to opt out, it can't be death to opt out. Like, you have to have a viable alternative to opt out into.
Mm.
So if I'm thinking about a food system that involves other like plant and animal people, they have to have viable habitats and relationships, because everything is relational, right? So
Hmm.
they need to have like the kinship network and the place in which they can live their life so that they actually have a choice. And that goes for humans too, like, what if we had a choice whether we wanted to opt into empire or not? And of course, empire has made it very like a concrete and explicit strategy to take that choice away, like land grabbing, primitive accumulation, land clearances, forcing people into industrial labor and urban life. It's all a part of forcing people to work for empire, to become part of empire or global economy, because there is no choice anymore. Like, it's taking away the choice. So it becomes like, how do I recreate that choice? And if I think of it like for humans, a lot of it has to do with my work with communities, of how can I create like viable local alternatives that can meet basic needs of humans without engaging as little as possible with empire, or with the global economy and the global systems. Because only when I have other ground to stand on, like really tangibly, there's other food, there's other water, there's other shelter, there are other human relationships that are less mediated by those systems, then I can make a choice. I can step out. And I feel a responsibility and a joy in helping create that, or helping more people create that, whether that's in kind of cooperative solutions for savings and insurance, or trade, or it could be community associations. A lot of it is like land rights and land access rights, yeah, rematriation of lands, protection of indigenous cultures and societies, the protection of land-based regenerative living and livelihood. So a lot of my imagination goes in that direction, towards what does it look like if we create systems where we have actual autonomy and actual choice, because then we can show up as kin, because I can choose. Like, I can choose how I show up, and I know how my actions impact you, because we are close to each other. Like, we have an actual relationship. You are not invisible to me, so I can care for you more tangibly. That's a little bit of what I would look for.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer, which opened up so many fountains of intrigue and interest and questions that I feel a bit overwhelmed as to which door to open. I wish we had 4 hours to speak, because I would like to speak about all of them. But I guess I have the difficult burden of choosing one right now. So I guess where I will go is, you alluded to the polycrisis. You said that we are in a time of unraveling and collapse, and we are being asked with how we show up, doing so ethically, doing so with respect, doing so in gratitude and care and solidarity and mutual aid and all of those things. And I agree with all of that. But the question that I have is, of all of the tentacles of the polycrisis, the social, the ecological, the spiritual, the relational, and they're all connected, what do you see as the primary bottlenecks that prevent communities or organizations or even individuals from shifting towards more regenerative, kincentric practices?
I mean, my thoughts go to the incredible concentration of power.
Mm,
It's maybe a weird thing to mention as a bottleneck, but I think that the incredible inequality in voice, access to resource, power, influence that exists in the world is an incredible bottleneck, because with that concentration of power comes zero interest in change. Like the more power ends up in the hands of a few, the more the world will be the way there. And with it, of course, comes, domination of media and narrative and story of what's possible. There comes the domination of, like, taking away choice, like I spoke about before, that there's such a span of things that comes with inequality. So that feels like a really big one to me. And,
mm,
because you've heard me speak about it before, but for me, one of the most interesting pieces of research from like into societal collapse historically has been that social inequality is a very good predictor for collapse of society. And vice versa. Like less in unequal societies have a tendency to navigate challenges and potential collapse better, with better outcomes for everybody. So if I were to say a second one is probably inclusivity and democracy, to like really safeguard what true democracy means, which is very, very rare on this, on the planet in this moment in time. And it's back to that idea of collective intelligence, of like we are smarter together. And there's a lot of research that shows that actually citizens' assemblies make more progressive and more earth-friendly policy suggestions than elected officials do. If we could leverage, or invite in explicitly the intelligence of the more than human world, we'd just be like so much smarter in how we go about things. So I think I would say those, yeah, like inequality and exclusion when it comes to voice and decision making.
yeah, great, great. I love that you said that because something sprang to mind about inclusion
Mm.
and reciprocity and kinship. It's all bound up. But in a world where we would grant personhood to a river, let's say, this kind of thing is a way to include the more than human world and its intelligences within our own, give justice and equity to the river, and give it a place at the table in terms of democracy and power, right? Because right now, the structures that we have not only disempower the river, but it's actually erasure. Like the river is just water, and it's for us to drink in or piss in or shit in or dump pollutants in. Like you were saying, flush the toilet and just fill it with our own excrement. Mm. So this idea of more radical inclusion and changing people's minds to midwife a world where this sort of thing is possible is, how feasible is something like that? Like I've had people on the show who petitioned for the Odra River in Poland to become a legal person, and with success. And I know this happens in other parts of the world, so it seems like this is gaining momentum and popularity. But this idea, I guess, didn't need to be codified into law in indigenous societies. Like this was just understood as like, yeah, you don't disrespect like brother river, or however the river is seen, it's something sacred. So how do we overcome this fracture where we have lost sight of you know our family that's around us, that sustains us, that gives to us, that is such a part of who we are, because without which we can't exist, right? It's all relational. So how do we reconnect to that?
Yeah. I'm now full of like that, how do we reconnect, and also the rights, because I think it's true, like what you say, things like rights of nature or nature governance in the way that we kind of see it emerging in societies that don't have traditional nature governance anymore. I think of it as kind of it's a transition solution. It's a way of making place and skewing like our systems towards something that is more life giving for everybody, but like you say, in a society that is deeply embedded, that like lives with a kind of lived experience of intimacy with the more than human world and interdependence, that's less needed, because you're more in the space of like etiquette, like I was speaking before. You're like relating to kind of entities that you know. So I think it's really great, the rights of nature and all of that, because we need it. And it's a way of maybe also creating awareness and starting to build that bridge. Like if I come to a meeting or a citizens assembly, and I have to interact with somebody representing the river as a person, as a being with rights, there, or as a being that is vital for my life and well-being, that can start something like our imagination, or the simple fact that I am for the first time invited to think about a non-human person as a person. I think it's a start. I think also just getting to know like some local feature, some other person that you interact with often, whether that's a tree or your local river or something like that. Just spend time, like get to know them. I think a lot of that other way of being comes from, I keep saying the word intimacy, but I think it's really true. Like you need to be intimate with other beings, and to be intimate with anybody, right, you have to spend time with them and close with them, right? And you got to get to know them. And I think that's the first step, because at least for me, once you open that door with one being, it's not so difficult to extrapolate and open it with other beings, and you can get to know a dog, like maybe that's the closest thing, and they're quite close to humans, so it's quite easy to appreciate, the dog, but maybe learn about dog communication and dogs' natural behavior. Like, how do dogs make decisions when they're being dogs, when they're not just like watching humans, and this, it's really interesting. They have lots of ways of like signaling consent or will or joy, or they try to speak to us, so we can kind of pay attention to that, and then just take it from there. And I think if we just, as a kind of provocation on our imagination, just, how about just for like 1 month, trying what would happen if you treat everybody as a person? If you just skip like, for those of us who speak languages that have, what's that called? Like inanimate pronouns, like it, the
Mm-hmm.
dog is an it or whatever. Just try to not speak like that for a month. Try to interact with everything, even if it's like my mug here. I could feasibly interact with this as a person, right? I could interact with time as a person. I could interact with each day as a person and be like, oh, welcome, Friday. So it happens to be Friday today. How wonderful. Like, we're going to spend time together. What's it like? I think sometimes like those, we can create little like immersive experiments for ourselves that actually can shift our worldview, because we're so locked into one way of being, and it's there in like the tiny things we do. So that would
Yeah.
be one very small way.
Yeah, yeah, small but very potent, very
Mm.
powerful. Because it's funny you mentioned that, because last night I was walking around in Wrocław in Poland, and we got to a busy intersection, and I saw this old maple that was there in the intersection, and I was looking at the tree and I was wondering, wow, what must it be like for this tree alone on a noisy city street full of cars and street lights, just sitting there kind of plucked from its natural habitat. And compared to a tree in a forest, what that tree's experience is like. And it came to me that, wow, even considering the needs and experience of something like a rock or a tree is already a huge leap for most
Mm.
people. So doing something as simple as giving personhood to things that we normally wouldn't give personhood to could be a huge step in the right direction in terms of leveraging our imagination. And a related question I had then to that is, what is the role of creativity, imagination, ritual, storytelling, all of these types of technologies, you could say, human technologies, maybe they're not even uniquely human, but what role do those play in cultivating a more kincentric worldview in contrast to this rational, scientific, modern Western framework that kind of relegates all of that stuff to superstition?
I think it has a huge role to play. Like, we are meaning making animals. We live according to the stories that we make, and the stories that we hold in common are the ones that have the most power. So by storytelling, like, it's a way of bringing other people along in your story, of increasing the potency of that story by having more energy like flow into it, like really tangibly. I think the same with ritual. Like, ritual is a way of collectively or individually affirming the world as you see it. Like, if it's
Mm.
speaking it as an anthropologist again here, but that's often what it is. It's like you kind of affirm the world order in the rituals that you do. So by doing rituals, especially together, I think it's just a lot of power in doing things together, because, one person talking to trees is crazy, but like a whole community talking to trees, they're just being people together. So community is super important. So doing ritual together, and as well as creativity and imagination, it's like, that's who we are, right? That's who we are as beings. We need culture to function fully. You cannot isolate a human being, take them away from other humans. They will not function. Like they will be severely like disturbed in their expression, in their personality, in their speech, in their, that it's like that. I sometimes think of, we have outsourced a large part of our blueprint as beings to culture and to
Hmm.
something that we hold in common. So we don't, it's not like software, hardware, like it's different. It's completely interdependent. Like we do not express who we are by nature without having culture, without having access to other human beings. So we can leverage that and tell stories. I think it's incredibly, incredibly important. And of course, there is a real like dearth of imagination. Imagination is dangerous. We can see of, how history in our or my European civilization has treated in the last 500 years people who had other ideas. Everything from like Copernicus to witches, like, you're burnt like, at the stake. That's what happens, right? So that's how dangerous daring to suggest that the world is different is. And they were not using imagination, I would say, like witches and Copernicus. They were very grounded in their own science. But there's something a little similar to it, right? There is part of that force of control. Don't you dare imagine that something could be different. And I say dare, like be audacious. Don't lose touch with the physical material reality. I mean, I say that a lot, and I feel a little bad about it, because I do genuinely believe that there is spirit in all matter, and all matter is also spirit. But there's something about the tangible world that we live in that we should not lose track of in our imaginations. Like bring all of that with us. But yeah, I think it's incredibly important to make meaning in that way, and to make it together, and to do it collectively, and to resource it as much as we can, because the big narratives that we're faced with, they have so much power behind them. They have so much power, and that's why they are so strong. And that's why it's difficult to challenge them. And we need each other to do that. So I think boost each other, boost each other's stories, boost each other's imagination, or what it could be. Never ridicule anybody for being utopian or naive, because that's usually where the really good stuff sits.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that as well. I agree. And there were two competing things that came to me as you were speaking. One was to maybe bridge towards your research that you did in the Peruvian Amazon with the Matses tribe, if I'm saying it correctly. Because when you were speaking just now of culture shaping who we are, there's also this concept that personhood itself is this malleable, flexible thing that's a field that's not just shaped by human culture, but shaped by other forces as well. And this is a fascinating and important idea to me. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that, because I think it's one of these ways that we can challenge those dominant narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's see how to enter that. I think when I would speak of personhood as a field, is simply saying that it too is not like an essential, inherent, fixed quality. It's something that is expressed in a relational way. And as beings who are in relation with others, we are not completely free to construct our own personhood. It's constructed in how it's reflected back to us. It's constructed in the stories that's told about our gender, or our species, or our social class, or our skin color. Like we are, everybody who has experienced any form of oppression or discrimination knows that we are ascribed qualities, like as people, like that. So I think that's a little bit what I mean with that. And of course in that we can even choose. So even in what I spoke about before, like if I acknowledge my deep interdependence with others, then I acknowledge that maybe my personhood is shaped also by these. And it's not a very scientific answer, but it's like if I start relating to other beings or other people that reflect me back differently, or that give me different input, my sense of self, I mean like personhood now, not in a legal sense, but like my sense of what is a person, what does it mean to be a person, what's a good person, like what is this thing that I consider myself to be a person, will shift. You probably experienced it if you've traveled. You travel somewhere far away that doesn't subscribe to the same markers of culture or status that you come from. Suddenly, like when I was with the Matses, none of my background matters there. In their world, I was like a bumbling fool, right?
Mm.
Not an educated, whatever, like accomplished, like leader of associations and blah, blah, blah. I was like a newborn and a stupid one at that. I couldn't do anything, right? And for me, it was so interesting how through being there, slowly I became a person in their world, but the person I was different. Like suddenly a key aspect of my like identity, I guess in this sense here, it's a little bit different from personhood, was like I don't like eating heads of things, and they thought that was hilarious. So it became like a baseline of like a story of who I am, right? But I'm sure you've also traveled sometimes and encountered like other expectations of what it means to be gendered in a certain way, and how weird that can be. Like why am I not cooking and sweeping the floor? Like why am I behaving like a man when I don't look like a man? Like there can be like dissonance and that. So I don't know. I think about it a lot like that. And I mean, in a kind of academic way, it was incredibly interesting to be with my friends in the jungle, the Matses, because they showed me this radically different way of considering personhood as something that you construct together with others, and they are very aware of that. We also do it, but they have like an aware story around it, that the people you eat with, the food you eat, the way you behave, the relationships you have, they constitute you as a person. That they not just as a physical being, but they make you really who you are. So to see that very different take on what it means to be a human being that they had, instead of being human being a fixed category that I was born into, being human is something I have to constantly perform through being in right relationship with other beings, humans and non-humans, right? That's what makes me human. That's what keeps me human. So a complete like inversion of what I was born into. But it also was the most radical experiences I've had of being stripped of my identity and redoing that, and how important again it was there to eat together with them. Like you don't refuse a meal, because that probably means you're not quite human, right? So I don't know, those are some of the things that come to mind, but I found it beautiful how they really have a deeply relational cosmology, and a deeply animist cosmology, and it shows up, of course, in everything, including in how they consider themselves to become people. you know
Hmm. Yeah, this relational cosmology, this animist sense of responsibility and like kind of co-constituting your sense of identity and self and all of that is really interesting to me, because when I think of it on a personal level, right? I subscribe to the view that everything is interconnected in this Buddhist way that Thich Nhat Hanh, he called it interbeing. I believe all life is sacred. So I hold these same principles as foundational. But then, as you said earlier, like we sometimes have to eat, right? So if I am a gardener, and I've had this experience before, where I'm gardening and I may be growing leeks, and to grow the leeks, I need to kill countless weeds. I need to disturb the delicate matrix of soil microorganisms when I dig my hands into the earth. And then eventually, when it's ready, I need to, pull this little leek out of its happy home in the ground and cannibalize little brother leek. And like, I sometimes struggle with like, what is to get back to etiquette? And like, I guess we're just going to be spiraling and swirling around things that are floating here, because it's so rich with everything feels really aromatic to me. Um, my own personal struggle that I have is like, how do I enter into a right relationship with that leek? Conceptually, I could read a book by like Robin Wall Kimmerer, who I love, and have this notion of asking the leek, is it okay that I eat you? But what you said earlier about like opt out, if the leek says no, actually, it gives me some clear sign that it doesn't want to be consumed, and I let it be in there, that whole protocol, that whole situation, to me sometimes feels so abstract when maybe it shouldn't. Maybe it should feel really embodied and somatic, where I watched this documentary on Anna Breitenbach. She's able to kind of commune with animals. And I'm like, well, then if that's possible, shouldn't it be possible to, as indigenous wisdom suggests, like know from the leak that it's okay to take it? But I struggle here. I stumble as like a weird white guy, just like, okay, what do I do? Like, how do I, how do I navigate that reality that seems like so relational, so complex, so nuanced, and respect the agency and intelligence of that leak?
Yeah, I think it's not an unusual struggle, right? Because sometimes I think not being born into a system, a culture that lives with that reality, it can seem really nice in philosophy, and then it just clashes. Like I gotta eat, so like what about it? Like it can't just be nice to everybody. So for me, it just points at like even deeper shifts in how to consider ourselves. Like who are we in that big flow? Like how important am I as an individual, and how important is the flow? And actually, I think actually what's I mean, of course, I am important. You're important. Like we are all important as people. But what's really important is the web of life,
Yes.
and we are here as expressions of the web of life to enrich the web of life.
Yes.
So there is something about like being cyclical, like really embracing cycles in our thinking. Like we are cycling nutrients, we are cycling love and energy and care. We are walking water around in our bodies to different places that are part of big cycles. So for me, it's almost an invitation to lean more into those cycles, which includes also myself. Like maybe I need to learn to be a little bit less attached to my physical form and body, and to really be friends with, which is not the easiest, to be like, I will be food, and like I will joyously give myself to this earth that has fed me for my whole life, right?
Yes.
And like what does this feel like to really like to live in a way where I can say that with truth of like I will joyfully, once it's time, give myself back to the soil and to the microbes, like, and become nutrients. Hopefully I'm not too toxic, because sadly we're all very toxic at the moment.
Full of
But that's one,
microplastics.
for me, yes, exactly, and heavy metals and stuff. So that's one of, for me, piece of how do I lean into the cyclical. Actually, the Amazon told me a huge, or taught me a huge lesson there, because I come from the north, like I'm born in Sweden, and northern and Arctic ecosystems function very differently. Like they're quite sparse, and there's a huge amount of energy invested in like each thing, like each being is there, and there aren't that many trees or species, and like it's kind of like a static and like conserving landscape. So that's what I grew up with, and that's what I have in me. And then I came to the Amazon, and the Amazon is like sprouting everywhere all the time, and it's so alive, and it's like living and dying simultaneously everywhere. Like everything
Mm.
is like growing and rotting at the same time. And you have thousands of species sprouting new like shoots everywhere. And I was like, in this place, the individual is not the primary thing. Like that's kind of what it gave to me. I was looking at the trees, and I was looking at the incredible profusion of like seedlings, and I was like, these seedlings have not all been planted to each one be in the optimal place for its for becoming a giant tree for hundreds of years. Like it's just like life everywhere in every way. And what matters is that the cycle continues, not, of course, again, each individual matters. So it was a huge gift for me there to be with that, and to see that life and death are so intimately connected. But then I think, in terms of your leek, like what I do, I think particularly of annual vegetables, because they take a lot of care, right? They have co-created themselves together with us in the shape that they are. They are no longer wild, like they are domesticated. So they have domesticated us to care for them, and we have,
Yes.
welcomed them into our lives, and we care for them. So I feel like we have a different contract with them, not to abuse them, but we care a lot. I mean, to grow that leek, you probably like hauled manure from some other place to fertilize the soil. You took care of everything around it, like all of that. So you have created conditions for that leek to live. So maybe the leek can joyfully be like, I want to become a part of Danny. Like, I want to give myself there. We can imagine, at least with leeks. Uh, at least with leeks. And what I do with my garden is I always let some things go to seed, whether they're onions and leeks or lettuces or, like things that don't normally fruit. I let them go to seed and I let them self-seed, or I save seed. And for me, that's part of the contract that I have with the beings that feed me, is that I take care of their future generations. Like, I have a commitment to their future generations and to
Mm,
them, at least some of them, experiencing a full life cycle. Like, what does it mean to age, to evanesce, and to die? Because they are annuals, like many of our vegetables, right? So they are with that. And for me, that also makes a difference.
yeah, that's a beautiful answer, a beautiful resolution to this conundrum. When you were speaking, I had this image of like, yeah, it's like Mother Nature, right? Mother Nature nourishes us, gives us, feeds us, sustains us, and inevitably it cleaves us from life and feeds us into the soil to metabolize us and give life to other things and keep that flow that you're describing going. And I was thinking, so then we as nature personified, right? We are nature. So when we are nurturing the leek or the tomato or whatever thing it is that we're caring for, it's an echo. It's like a fractal reimagining of what's happening to us on this meta level. So I was thinking, oh, wow, I never noticed this parallel there. But yeah, there is a sense of love for that little leek, right? And maybe it's reciprocal. Maybe the leek is also like, take me. And it's like, it's like totally happy to be consumed and become a part of that process. Because we're all a process, right? Like that's another thing. We see ourselves as not only separate and distinct, but not a process. We're like these fixed things, but everything is a process. Everything is relational and it's a process. Like even a mountain is a process. We see it as this huge thing, but like the Dolomites in Italy, they used to be underwater.
Mm.
So like a huge process of tectonic plates shifting and things happening and all kinds of organic forces make those the mountain range that they are now. And that's beautiful. That's amazing. But we exist in these little slices of time that occlude this truth and block it. So yeah, this idea of like porosity, relationality, processes, the cyclical nature, the flow, all of that is so exciting and interesting and yeah, so thank you for stirring this like witch's cauldron of stuff that's bubbling around us right now.
Do you know what comes to mind when I hear you speak now? Because you're bringing in the element of time and of temporality, which is also really beautiful. Like, because flows extend across time, right? And I think that's another practice that we can do as people, of extending our sense of self and identity and being, like, into the past and into the future,
Yes.
to not exist only as this little, like, snapshot. I mean, that might be an ancestor practice, or it might be a seven generations, practice, or something, but just to practice orienting ourselves in our temporality in a more expansive way. I think that's really beautiful. Like, I have this example, personal story. Like, it's 6 years ago now. I had gone through like a major crisis of a lot of grief and loss, and I went to the Pyrenees for a pilgrimage, basically. And I did the high route of the Pyrenees, which is a kind of walk you can string together that follows the high line of the mountains between France and Spain. And when I arrived, I did like an attunement or a prayer at the beginning. I just walked like 1 hour, into the trail. And when I came to a place, I stopped to do a dedication and for what I was praying for and doing my pilgrimage for. And I started with this gratitude of the people who brought me there. And it was like my friend gave me a ride to the trailhead. So like started like very small, there. And then it just grew. And it went from the people there in my life, my friends, the person who was taking care of my home, the thing that had happened to me before, which was like a horrible loss, because it also brought me, to this moment. But then it just spiraled. And suddenly I was like, everything that had to happen for me to be here. That includes like the full evolution of life on planet Earth, because without that, I would not exist. It includes the Earth shaping and becoming, hospitable to life. It of course includes the earth being created. It includes everything,
Yes.
everything, all the way back to like the Big Bang and whatever came before the Big Bang, right? And I was just, when you have this realization that's no longer mental image, but it was just in my body. I was like that's the level that of magnitude of gift that this life has given me, for me to stand there at that trailhead and just be. And I was so awestruck. I was, crying, and I was on my knees with gratitude, and that stayed with me of like, wow, I am here, of course, because of my lineage, my ancestors, and the people who came before me to fight for the rights that I enjoy today, and all of that, and my teachers, but also this incredible more than human story of the cosmos, right? And I mean, even just thinking about it, I'm just, that feeling you have inside when you're really like full of awe, and it's like it's just this, yeah, incredible like expansion and light and love. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's really important also to learn to think in the times and cycles and temporality of other beings. Like you said, the earth is also a being, comes together, is born, does its thing, at one point will go away. And the same with the mountains, the same with the whole universe. And how exciting to not know what comes on the other side of, the inhalation of the universe, what's like the next exhalation. So
Thank you for that beautiful story and imagery. And I I'm loving this conversation so much. I just want to do a time check and see if you have a little more time, or should we start to wrap up and just check in with you since we are co-creating this together.
I have a little more time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because there's still so much there on the table for me, and these are the exact types of topics that I love speaking about, and the way you speak about them I really love, and I find them resonant. So I want to keep you for a little longer in this space.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm enjoying.
And I'm also really grateful that you're here, because speaking of gratitude and this whole thing, it's just really nice to spend some time with you and talk about these things, 'cause I think they're so important. So as you were speaking about gratitude, I just wanted to voice some and say I'm thankful for your time here. Um, and there were other questions that I had. Like, one huge topic is community, but the thing that I'm feeling now is more like magic and wonder, because when you just told that story, I was thinking, wow, like it's incredible the way that life works. And so often we live in this world where everything seems mundane and rote and mechanical, and we even have this mechanized view of the world, which I think is not life affirming. It sucks the life out of this vibrant, crazy thing, because I was thinking something as simple as like the sun and what it does, and its relationship to oxygen. This is a really magical, insane thing to me, because the air we breathe is something out of science fiction, right? Like, there's a giant burning ball of flames 93 million miles away at the heart of our solar system, burning like a celestial torch. And the light that it sends out takes 8 minutes to get here. And when it gets here, it penetrates deep into the ocean to photoplankton and cyanobacteria and algae. And then they, through sheer magic, they photosynthesize this stuff and turn it into sugar and oxygen and release that out into the fish and marine mammals and all the terrestrial life on the planet. And when you think about it, we're effectively like breathing fire. There's a ball of burning gas that's transformed into this invisible substance that we breathe in. It's insane. It's so magical and relational and reciprocal. The sun is just doing that, and the plants are just doing that. And yeah, like, this magic is so, it gets me so excited to think about it.
Yeah, I'm the same. And like that's where I think for me, science has actually been a huge doorway into awe and magic, because it is so amazing. Like what's going on is so amazing. Like, and you can look at anything around you and just scrape the surface a little bit, and stop taking it for granted. And it's just mind blowing, right? Mind blowing. And I love that. So that's a great joy in my life, is like finding things out that just sort of explode as these little bubbles of awe and delight, and then to embed that in how I look and live every day. Again, like once you have that insight about the sun, you have access to looking at the sun in a completely different way than you had before. You might not do it every day because we all, take the sun for granted sometimes. But that's sort of where that practice of like bringing our awareness to like another entity, bringing our full regard, bringing our gratitude, and just contemplating even, the gift that puts us at least in a space where we are less likely to just take it for granted and forget about the magic that it does. But yeah, no, I get great joy out of science in that way. And I always wonder, because I am not born into a culture that has that level of intimacy with the living world, but I'm going to assume that there are many other forms of science that give a similar feeling of, wow, it's all connected and it's so intricate and it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful and it's so perfect in a way. It's just kind of mind blowing. But yeah, so sometimes I'm really curious about other cultures and other beings' doorway into that magic and into that awe. And it also reminds me of something you said before of, how it's not this like kincentrism or this kind of approach to the more than human world. It's not just something abstract and like woo woo. It's just like real. It's actually like a real appreciation of what's really going on.
Yes.
And it's the other story that's some kind of weird abstraction
Yes.
that has taken us away from that appreciation, regard, and intimacy with others.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And maybe this could be the bridge to community where I also wanted to get to, because what you were talking about earlier was Samhain and this ancestor encounter you had with your ancestors, because that is a day from ancient pagan tradition where we honor the ancestors and you honor the dead, and you also give them personhood. They're not just dead and gone, they're still here with you and you could engage with them. And maybe leveraging the community of ancestors past and future, that we exist in this continuum of, that you were alluding to earlier. Maybe we could find insight or wisdom or guidance from those people who knew this stuff, right? Because like the modern mind is a little bit of an aberration in that sense. Like for 99% of our existence, we understood intimately this relational web that we exist in. And only lately have we departed from that. So do you have a sense that there is a way to reconnect and reestablish those relational connections with the web of life through the community that we are in, not just the community of life in the biosphere and other humans, but also the community of people who have passed and the community of those who are to come?
I think so. I mean, I'm a bit of a baby when it comes to like ancestor practices.
Me
It's
too.
it's
Yeah.
come late into my life and I'm definitely not an expert, but I mean, I really like it as a provocation though. Like, I have obviously spent time extending my sense of community, like you said, to the biosphere, to non-human beings. And if I extend it to my ancestors, sometimes I think about, I mean, let's do future generations, because I feel a community with the future. It is somehow like acting in solidarity with the future, which is part of what I spoke to before of like, how can I show up in a way that enriches the web of life for future generations? That's for me somehow is living in community with them. And maybe I could make that more tangible through different practices. That's very, very possible. And when it comes to ancestors, I think one thing is connecting with like my own ancestors and what I know about them. And some of us know a lot about our ancestors and some of us don't know a lot at all. I happen to be quite lucky in that my family has a lot of stories of our lineage and of our people. And I can see how they shape me. I mean, even my interests and like things that I have pursued in life and how I prefer to live and all of that. I can see echoes of that like in my ancestry expressed in different times of my life, which is just really fun, you know? Like I said, microcycling, I was very active in student politics and like reform of the higher education system when I was still at university. And I found out that one of my ancestors was like very in the empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but he was like a huge champion of higher educational reform or educational reform,
Hmm.
like in his mission, 300 years ago or something. I thought that was hilarious. Like what a like parallel to find. Anyway, so stories like that. But I think there is also connections with the land and the ancestors of the place that you happen to be in. So
Yes.
I think of it often in the place where I live, because I live on my partner's ancestral land, in the farm of his grandparents, in a mountain valley where people have, I'll say, like a little bit marginal. It's like never been like really integrated, like at the core of a local like realm or empire or something like that. It's always been a place where people kind of just quietly farm in the mountains and live their lives, and the landscape doesn't lend itself to a lot of amassment of resource. So it's always been kind of an egalitarian but small scale place. And I walk around the landscape and sometimes I don't know which ancestor to listen to,
Mm,
because the land here wants to be a forest. It is naturally a forest. It wants to be forest. The human ancestors, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, have put a lot of energy into this place not being a forest, to make a living from it. So, an incredible effort of like clearing fields, terracing, nurturing the soil. Having rotational grazing and like sort of um, all of the, I mean, actually regenerative practices for keeping a kind of forest and prairie or pasture landscape alive. And now those pastures have been abandoned and they are closing, right? Because the natural succession of, bracken, bramble, seedlings, bushes, like wants to become a forest. Like if there is no human here tending the landscape, it becomes a forest, right?
mm,
So who am I listening to? Like, I feel a responsibility to the human ancestors of this place to care for what they loved and cared for so much. But I do also feel a responsibility towards the will and the kind of thrust of the natural ecosystem. But they're very much with me, when I construct my life here and when I walk around and when I plant and when I think about what to plant and what to do. So that is, in a sense, like, I walk. This is again a small story from my personal life, but I walk with an awareness of them. But it's complicated, when we live in like with huge colonial legacies. Like here it's simple. They were like mountain farmers doing regenerative farming. That's like not a very complicated ancestral lineage to dig into. But like my other my real like blood ancestry were completely like agents of empire in the Austro-Hungarian Empire for many generations and thrived because of empire. There. Maybe not involved in like horrible atrocities and colonization like abroad, but still. So it's also there in me. So how do I don't know. I think I hold that as an open question of, how do I hold that? What's the healing work I need to do? What are the reparations, like internal and external, that I can do with how I live to express my gratitude to those ancestors and be in community with them in that way? But I don't have to inherit their, their ways necessarily. So I think it can be complicated and of course also very painful. There's a lot of atrocities committed and suffered in our ancestries collectively. So,
mm.
but maybe without, I don't know what you think. Like maybe without doing that work, we are also way less grounded, right? Maybe part of standing firmly, like on the earth, really is doing that, which of course means tending to those wounds of the past also.
Yeah, again, beautiful answer. Thank you for that and the personal stories. And you're reminding me, I just finished reading Vanessa Andreotti's latest book, Outgrowing Modernity. And it speaks about similar things. And she's great. I really like her previous book, Hospicing Modernity. But she is always advocating doing this hard work of composting our shit and sitting with the grief and the complexity and the contradiction and the paradox and all of this stuff. And at this point in my journey, in my life, I see so much truth and weight in that, because what you're saying is that it's this paradox and this tension between which ancestor am I venerating? Am I respecting the human ancestors or the land which sustained the human ancestors and which they were in relationship with or had a certain contract with? Did the land agree to be tended that way? Were respects paid? And not having that context, it's hard for us in this as temporal creatures to know that. And how do we sit with that? How do we compost that? What do we do with that grief and that uncertainty, which is another huge component of our times because we're so fixated on certainty and outcomes and forecasting and predictability, but the world doesn't work that way. The world is uncertain and messy and complex. And so I like that you're drawing attention to this right now in terms of ancestors, because yeah, like we often think too much about our human ancestors when there's whole worlds of non-human ancestors. Like even water is one of our most important, and fire, so many. So the sun, all of this stuff is all connected. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is either, but I think that the task, or what is being asked of us, maybe that's a good closing question. If the earth is alive, and we think it is, what is it asking of us? And I hate that I'm using the word "it" here. There's a quote actually that I wanted to share that I think you might like. I hope I have it here. It's about the earth being non-binary. Yeah, so it goes, Vanessa Andreotti writes, in this context, a more fitting metaphor for the earth might be an untamable, no-nonsense, non-binary pregnant drag queen who warps time, bends space, spits rainbows, farts hurricanes, and revels in complexity. So I loved that description of the earth. It's like, wow, yeah.
Sounds like somebody I'd like to know. I use they for the earth. I feel like that works really well for me. Yeah.
Yes. So then, do you have a sense of what they are asking of us?
What comes up like immediately in me is just come home. Like, come home, find your way back home. Yeah, I mean I'm almost like that. Everything is like in that sentence, which I could elaborate on, but there's something there. Just come home, like come back home to me, to yourselves, to what it is to be here. And I think for me, in that coming home, there's a relaxation, there is a leaning back into that web, there is a dropping of this crazy, modernist hat of we are the masters of everything, so everything relies on us, and we must do and fix and create everything. Like the fallacy of that kind of anthropocentric idea of creation, right? That we are the locus of creation and we are the locus of solutions. Like we're not, we're just participants. So there is this sense of like softening, slowing, leaning back, like letting ourselves like sink back in to be part of that fabulous drag queen spitting rainbows. And because that's what we are, like we are part of them, right? Yeah, so there's something there, and I think it's, part of modern society that I struggle with, and it's part of my movements that I struggle with, and the responses to the crisis that I struggle with is that, like, I think we need to respond in a way that doesn't just spin faster and faster. Everything wants to increase and spin, and it's just more mess, so there's something about, yeah, us as humans collectively and the systems that we are part of to just stop, like don't consume, like breathe, breathe with your belly, like not with your shoulders. There's something really about just like stopping, slowing, dropping in, having time, needing less, um, giving more to those who do not have what they need. Yeah, so I think those are all things that I put into the earth saying, just come home and like sit and revel, in the story you told about the sun, or the fact of, how whales oxygenate the ocean and act as huge like nutrient pumps and carbon drawdown, sort of facilitators, like just to revel in how beautiful everything is put together already. We don't have to do so much. We just got to participate in a good way.
When you said come home, I got goosebumps. There was just this so succinct, but with so much gravity at the same time. So thank you for that answer. And as I already said, I would love to talk to you for hours and hours, but I want to respect your time. So usually at the end, I give you a couple of minutes to just talk about anything that you didn't get to speak about and wanted to speak about. a thought or a story or something you want to share, or where you want to let people know where they could find you, whatever you're feeling moved to share, it's just the time is for you.
Thank you. Well, I feel like this conversation has put me into like quite like a deep and contemplative space. I really deeply enjoyed it and engaging with you. So it's funny because that's where my being and my thoughts are. And then you said, "Oh, and where can people find you?" And I'm like, "Oh, that hadn't even crossed my mind." But that's useful. So if people do want to find me, my name is quite unique. So it's very easy to find me. If you just search for me, you can find me as a person on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest. Or find Kincentric Leadership online. You can find my work with the Global Ecovillage Network through the Global Ecovillage Network website, which is just ecovillage.org. The other one is kincentricleadership.org. And yeah, I don't know. Find me for other deep and beautiful conversations. This was super enjoyable. And it's like you say, I feel like we could meander on to many other directions. But I also feel sort of deeply satisfied and full in that sense of, feeling like we had it was a good time.
Yeah, I feel the same. I just want to give you one more shower of gratitude and thanks for the work that you do, for the voice, the way you articulate your ideas, for the time, for the energy, for the focus, for what I think is perhaps the most important work that we could be doing in these times, for passing through with me. This was an honor, a pleasure, a gift, a joy. So thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it and hope to do it again one day.
Thank you so much, Danny. Likewise.
Thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you, dear listener. Thank you for your support, for your attention, for spending some time with me and this episode's guest. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, rate it, like it, tell your friends about it, buy a billboard somewhere next to a highway promoting it. I mean, I'm kidding, of course, but your support really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.